Most burnout is really just defense of an identity. So I want to start like identity typically feels solid, but it really isn't. It's actually more of a ongoing moment to moment reconstruction. So let's take a look at it. I'm going to go back through some examples in my life and kind of pick various points at which identity was different. When I was in a boardroom, for example, and I was running a meeting or a facilitation, I was a different person in that meeting than I was at home at 2 o'clock in the morning looking after a crying kid, or different than I was at a family gathering, or different if I was out on a date with my wife or my partner. So I think you can see that identity itself is a constantly shifting sense of self. And we tend to get locked in to a sense of fixed identity. Um, so it's not really clear to us which one of these things is real. I think a lot of us face this kind of discontinuity or contradiction when we have these different identities shifting because we're not quite sure which one is really us. And that's where a lot of this conflict comes around burnout, because you're so busy trying to manage the environment around you to fit with the identity that you're holding in that moment. And that identity can get pretty locked in. It's habit and repetition that kind of grooves something in our consciousness. Um, but if you stop and pause, you can see that identity shifts. And um, another way to look at it is even just now. So as you're watching this, if you just pause for a moment and without memory, without reference to anything from your memory, who are you right now? Not your roles, not stories, not the things you've heard from people, no projections into the future about what you want to become. What are you in this moment? And if you pause just with me for a second and let all the other noise drop down, you can pick it up again in a moment. I think what you'll discover is something a little quieter. Perhaps awareness to begin with, like a field that's just aware. And then sensations, whether those are things coming through your senses the way we think about them typically, like some sort of physical sensation, or something mental. Could be thoughts, feelings. Sometimes people describe with both physical and non-physical attributes. So those sorts of things. Now, they're all appearing. Awareness, sensation, thoughts. You can see them moving in front. But is there a fixed entity in any of that? So what I think happens here, and through the research I've done on neuroscience, on consciousness, on quantum physics, kind of looking at the different fundamental domains that roll up into what we consider to be the seat of consciousness, or our identity or awareness, whatever you want to call it. There's so many words for it, but I think the essence of it is the same for all of us. What science has discovered, and I think we have known for a long time, it's just been very hard for us to articulate, is that it's not quite clear how much, from our lived experience, how much there's a world out there that our brain and senses and everything else is receiving, and how much is us projecting out there. A lot of the latest neuroscience research points to much more information being generated and pushed out than being received and pulled in. So the brain predicts and projects more than it is taking in a external environment and then mapping that inside. It's actually doing both, and it's more weighted towards prediction. And your memory has a role to play in that. Memories of the environment, the space, things that are very deeply coded in you. From a baby, from touch, from smell, from those senses that maybe aren't as apparent or obvious. But they kind of sit very deep. And so memory is kind of enrolled in this, and then narrative. So who you are and what you've been told you are, the stories you've taken on about yourself, the religion, background, country, tendencies, your star sign. So many attributes that you've picked up become part of this story and narrative. And it's not like the entire narrative plays all the time, but there is sort of this packaging of narratives, let's say, bundles of them. Maybe that's a better word, bundles that seem to assemble on the fly. Some of them that are kind of pre-assembled bundles that you kind of grab at really quickly, and other ones that you kind of put together in the moment. And I think what ends up happening is, as the brain predicts and memory updates and your narrative kind of kicks in, you create an identity with which you meet what's happening. And there's a sense of continuity in all of this. And as we've just talked about, though, it's not the identity itself that's continuous. The identity is shifting, right? Because we're going through different roles, partner, parent, worker, so on. And then there's something behind it that's observing those entities, and that is, or those identities, and that is maybe the continuous path. So continuity is useful for working in this environment, maybe, but it's not fundamental to the identity. And I'm wondering if you can see that, like there's a separation of some kind between the construct of the identity and the very thing, sort of seeing the identity or recognizing it or recording it as existing in this moment. And you'll see this, right? Like you're not really in control of all of this because this is tied to stresses. Like when you are activated, criticism maybe, or something at work falls through, a promotion that you don't get, a deal falls through, you're arguing with your partner, those sorts of things, maybe feeling rejected by someone, by your kids, or whatever it might be. Those trigger in you defensive identities that feel threatened. And when those things happen, it's an image that's being threatened. That criticism or that promotion not coming through, that's targeted at this image you have of yourself. And not saying it's not valid. I'm not calling that into question. I'm just saying that the image itself is the one that's targeted by the criticism, and that's what feels threatened, and that's kind of what starts to vibrate in you in a way, and that's what I think this burnout piece is at some level. It is this defense of an identity. You're trying to protect a path or an image and continue towards that goal that no longer serves you. You're burning a candle at both ends. You're not sleeping at night. You are fighting, struggling, stressed. And I think all those things pile up, and there's this drift from kind of who you are and what you can be. There's this drift from that reality as we believe more and more in these transient and sort of fleeting um, images. I've certainly felt the kind of burnout piece many, many times. I just didn't know what to call it then, and I didn't know why it was happening. I was, um, it's happened so many times. Like at age 16, when I was in school and struggling to kind of balance expectations and desires that I had, expectations for schoolwork, desires that I had to be in sports and drama and other things, and that came at a cost. Burned out at work, burned out in relationships. And there's just a pattern of like I have, like commitment to an image or an identity and overindulgence in it, an overextension of it, believing too deeply in it, not seeing the balance side of it. And I think that cost me each time. I mean, cost me in the sense of it was painful and it was suffering and it was hard. But I wouldn't, I don't regret it in that sense because the lessons from it have landed me here now, where I can see it and I can see the pattern and I can start to notice when it comes up and I can reorient myself towards something that's more whole. And I can help people who are facing these kinds of things. So, I've lived that life where I didn't feel I could slow down or I couldn't change my speed in a way. Like I was either full throttle or, you know, full throttle. It was like, but there's a different way of doing that. I think there's a way of being fully committed to the moment that takes little to no effort. And then there's being committed that takes a lot of effort. And that's the piece I'm talking about. It's the effort that comes with identity maintenance, the exhaustion that comes from it. And I think I was mistaking things. Like I was mistaking exhaustion from thinking it was coming from work and not realizing it was coming from defending that identity, that competent one, like the provider, the strong one. And I didn't feel like those things all the time. I was a safe pair of hands. I was reliable and trustworthy and all those things. And until I wasn't, until I didn't want to be that person. And it kind of broke spectacularly, but it broke. And the relief of it was like really tangible. Like I could feel the relief of being able to give up those stories. So, I think things that you become good at, things that you adapt to, aren't necessarily essential. And so sometimes that's what we can end up doing is ending up in that food. And I mean like essential in the sense that if you think about it, when you go to sleep at night, when you go to deep sleep, that those identities, all of them, disappear. For however long you go to sleep, those roles disappear, the narrative and the storytelling disappear, the titles, ambition, growth, all of those things, troubles as well. All your mistakes and your problems, all your deficiencies, everything that you don't think you're good at, all of those things disappear. So where do they go when you're sleeping? And why is it so? It's not a problem. You have no trouble going to sleep. And then when you wake up, you go, I slept and I was fine. Until you start thinking about all those things for a moment there, you're fine when you wake up. So there's clearly something that's continuous through sleep, because then you wouldn't get up and say, I slept, and you wouldn't hear it if someone called you. So there's something there. But it's not the identities we talk about during our waking state. It's not those roles. So what is that? For the longest time, I thought that if I went down this path, that I would lose who I was in a way. And that was terrifying because when you start to feel these identities dissolve, or you talk about doing that intellectually, you start to worry. And I guess it just kind of kicks off the same thought pattern and fear pattern that, you go from fearing that you're not going to be the person you think you could be, or not living up to your potential, and all those kinds of fears. Again, baked in sort of images and identities again. Like you think you're going to lose all of them, and you start to talk yourself out of doing these things, or you start to attack them, which just makes them stronger. And these identities dissolve when you ignore them, not push them away and say, I'm not that person, I don't want to be like that, because you just kind of perpetuate them then. It's like loosening them by not giving them so much fixed attention, and they start to dissolve, and those identities just soften. And it's not about pushing all of this stuff away. It's about using it as a mirror and using it as a tool to point you to where you still might be stuck a little bit. So I look at identities now as these reconstructions of constructions that you can let go of. They're not your essence. They're just ways you have learned to assemble your senses and thoughts and all of that into a bundle or a package or whatever I was calling it, I think a bundle. And there's a ton of relief when you start to see it that way, because you realize the flexibility gives you that. You can adapt and morph in moments as they need, as you need to be. It doesn't have to be a fixed thing all the time. There's a really nice quote that I use all the time from, I think it's Alan Watts. It says something along the lines of, you're under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago. I really like that because I think it releases some of that tension that we have to be the same thing, or we have to show a consistent face, or whatever that is. I'm not a brand. I'm not a company. I'm something different. And I don't need to be consistent in that way. Each situation demands something different. And each person, each relationship. I think if you start looking at the world relationally and not from identity, you start to perceive something quite different. So as you're kind of reflecting on this and thinking about things as you go through your days and weeks, maybe when your identity comes up and you feel this kind of storm coming on, if you can find a moment to just breathe and pause and ask yourself, like, what version of me, what identity, what image is trying to be protected right now? Like, what am I trying to protect? What am I trying to preserve? When, it's harder to do this when things are good, because we don't really want to question when things are good. But if you notice that you're very happy, or you notice something great happened, ask yourself again, like, which identity, which image of me, which part of me is feeling this happiness? Because it works both ways. And the ups and the downs can really help you figure out where these identity pieces are lurking and how to connect to that deeper sense of self, that continuity, that thing in you which makes this moment feel real, or that identity feel so solid. What's that? Thanks for listening.